Hi everyone, this is your producer Peter Finger. Before we jump into today's show, I want to share an exciting opportunity with you. The Triad Summit Series happening online on February 20th. This free event brings together top experts in the field, and attendees will also have a chance to earn CE credits. This year's lineup features an outstanding group of experts including Amy Pickett Williams from the Light Movement, Lindsay Bonham from Money Nuts and Bolts, Bronwyn Schweikart from Angry at the Right Things podcast, and returning speakers Dr. Laura Ignacio and our very own Dr. Graham Taylor. They'll be covering essential topics for mental health professionals such as healing from grief, financial skills for therapists, managing and understanding anger, and self-meaning-based therapy for couples. Don't miss this opportunity to learn, grow, and connect with leading experts in the field. Register for free at triadhq.com/TSS. That's triadhq.com/TSS. We look forward to seeing you there. Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a podcast brought to you by the Triad Network. This podcast is designed to share trending topics occurring within the world and our communities and bring them a behavioral and mental health perspective.
Welcome to Behavioral Health Today. I'm your host, Charlie Dixon. Joining me today is Ann Russo, a licensed therapist, advocate, and founder of AMR Therapy, a small group practice dedicated to providing mental health care for the LGBTQ+ community, people of color, and individuals in non-traditional relationships. With a unique background in both theological studies and social work, and combines deep compassion with a nuanced understanding of the intersections between sexuality, spirituality, and mental health. Anne is also working on her forthcoming book, currently in contract with PESI, which introduces the religious trauma treatment model. This innovative framework equips mental health professionals with tools to help clients heal from the psychological and spiritual wounds of high control religious systems, reclaiming autonomy, self-worth, and meaning. Today, we're thrilled to explore the intersections of non-monogamy, LGBTQ+ identity, and religious trauma. And we'll share her insights on how these aspects of identity can sometimes conflict, the impact of religious teachings on sexual and spiritual self-acceptance, and the importance of navigating these issues authentically. We'll also discuss therapeutic approaches to support individuals in reclaiming their sense of self amidst these challenges. And welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you, Shirley. I'm so happy to be here.
Absolutely. So let's just jump right into it. As we get started, I understand that you were raised in a non-monogamous household. Can you share what non-monogamy is and how that experience shaped your views on relationships and sexuality?
Sure. So I was actually raised with my mom, my dad's male partner, and then my younger sister from the time I was 5 to 14. I didn't know that was non-monogamy until recently because I just knew that I lived with, my mom, my dad, and my dad's partner, and that was our family, right? And it was in the study of non-monogamy that I started to see that there are many ways that people have non-monogamy or alternative relationships, and this was one of the ways to do that. And then when I was 14, I lived with my dad and his partner, and they actually had more of a non-monogamous relationship that involved multiple partners. So I had kind of a taste of different forms of non-monogamy growing up
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
trying to understand, what all of that meant as an adult and as a psychotherapist.
Right. All right, absolutely. So, how would you say that growing up with non-monogamy, how did that challenge traditional views of relationships for you? I heard you say that you didn't even know that that wasn't what normal is, so to
Yeah,
speak.
yeah.
So, how did that shape how you saw relationships, especially when it comes to religion? I am from the South, born and raised in between South and North Carolina, and this isn't really a topic or something that is discussed openly here. And so I'm just really curious how experience it really challenged things for you and what your idea of normal or acceptance of non-normal or non-traditional is.
Sure, sure. And I appreciate that question. And I just want to say shout out to North Carolina. I think it's such a pretty state. But anyway, so during this time from 5 to 14, I was in Arizona. And Arizona at this time, this was in the 80s and the early 90s, was considered a conservative state.
Ah.
And the views on we lived in an area that was highly Mormon or Latter-day Saints. Okay, so we're
Okay.
a very religious community.
Gotcha.
So what I understood at the time, because I don't even think my family really had the language for what was going on. I remember my dad just saying like, this is our family unit, and I didn't really. No one said this is a non-monogamous family. It just
Gotcha.
yeah. But I did know that I was not allowed to say anything about my dad's sexual orientation, being of a
Mhm.
gay male. So even though, yes, my mom was in the picture at this time, we were all living together in a non-traditional way. My dad did identify at that point as a gay male.
Gotcha.
Okay. So, but on the outside, we showed up as a heteronormative family with a roommate. And we were
Okay.
not allowed to say a thing
Gotcha.
about because we were told that people won't like it, they won't accept it, they won't understand.
Mhm.
So my sister and I, our whole family was very closeted in that way.
Okay.
And it wasn't until I was 14 and we moved to Long Beach, California, which was much more liberal place, even
Mhm.
mid 90s, right?
Yeah.
And my mom was no longer living with us at this time. So now it appeared like a household of two kids and two gay men, two dads, right?
Yep.
And then as I got a little bit older, I understood that my dad and his partner were in non-monogamous relationships with other people, or they had an open relationship, is what they called it at the time.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay.
And that was more digestible, and that was not something I needed to necessarily go explain to other people. It was just like,
Mhm.
"Dad is gay, and this is his partner, or these are my two dads," right? I didn't need to
Yeah.
define the dynamics of their relationship to other people.
Absolutely. And so you kind of bring in a couple of different things. So, of course,
Yeah.
that religion, it really does promote, or I'll say Western religion here in America does do a lot of promotion of the monogamous, male headed, heteronormative family structure as what is normal and what is correct and what is right. But then you also bring in where you live may determine how that is experienced or able to be outwardly expressed.
Sure. And there's definitely with religion, and I love that you're bringing this up because I love religion. But I think that the issue there was not so much about whether or not something's an alternative relationship style, but very much that if you're of I call it a high control religion or a conservative religious background,
Mhm.
if you're a gay person, that's considered sinful within that faith.
Right.
So that becomes very challenging. And if you're moving in those circles, and even if you're not moving in those circles, because even, in California, I knew many conservative Christians specifically who absolutely view, being gay as a sin,
Right.
and I've talked to many of those people. I work with many people from those backgrounds. So 100%, absolutely. But monogamy, the idea of talking about non-monogamy and polyamory, it's like I feel like we're hitting a whole other threshold talking about that, right? So it's like we have
Right.
so it's like the gay piece is like, okay, yeah, it's in the Bible. We're not really a big fan of this, but then you have some folks that are like more moderate, more liberal. There's a big
Mhm.
around that. But when we
Yeah.
talk about like non-monogamy, it's like people are not ready for that.
Absolutely. That blows kind of the top off of
Yeah,
everything
exactly.
else.
Oh,
Like that's a whole nother, like, what does that even mean? That is not allowed, and I made a point to mention in Western religious cultures, because I know in some Muslim faiths that is absolutely what happens, multiple, a man and multiple wives and things like that. So I just was curious, how do you think that the stigma affects people's ability to explore non-monogamy, or how they can experience their own level of sexuality authentically.
So I want to put out there with it when we're talking about non-monogamy, or when I'm talking about non-monogamy,
Mhm.
there is not a specific way that I'm speaking about it. And I think
Okay.
that that's really important because, you'll hear about like the the polyamory folks that are part of Latter-day Saints in Utah, or you'll hear about, like you mentioned, like n- in the Mormon household or the Muslim households where
Hmm.
some, they have multiple wives. Those are still very patriarchal type of
Yes.
ways of doing it.
Yes.
So what I'm talking about is a situation where an individual is clear and authentic about their needs and wants when it comes to relationships, and that they're able to have those needs met by one partner, two partners. Like
Okay.
it literally could look like anything. And that's, I think, what can become confusing and tricky, because some folks could make the argument that you're in a non-monogamous relationship if you and your best friend are a little emotionally too close. You know what I mean? Like, or viewed as too close. So it's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
so what are we talking about? Are we talking about emotionality, spirituality, sexuality? What are we into? Like, what kind of connections are we speaking about here?
Mhm.
And I think that when you're looking at a more heterosexual paradigm, people just kind of fall into this idea of like, well, this is what this means. And we don't question it. Like,
Right.
man marries woman, woman doesn't have male friends, men don't have women. Like, it's just, this is what you do, but we
Yes.
don't talk about it.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily fulfilling or working or even authentic or honest in the relationship that you're in. You're not necessarily even speaking to your partner about it. Right.
Right.
So being from a queer upbringing, it kind of forced me to look at, well, what are these barriers mean? What actually makes people happy? What does non-monogamy look like in practice for some folks? Is that something that could work for me? Could it not work for me? What do you like? So it's really the depth of understanding yourself
Mm.
more than it is about anything else. And this is not me saying that monogamy is wrong. Monogamy is great if it's authentic to you.
Right. Yeah.
So that's all it comes down to, authenticity.
Got you. Mm. So, what advice then would you give to someone who is is unsure or questioning that level of sexual identity, or what fulfillment in a relationship means to them? And if it, especially if it comes in conflict with their religious beliefs. We all come from a different area or a different religious background or upbringing. What advice do you give to someone who is really struggling to identify themselves or not, and still carry on with their religious beliefs and religious practices? How do the two go together?
Great question. I think that they can go together, but it takes a lot of work to do this. And it's very individualistic. So, if we're talking specifically about sexual orientation, that may look really different from someone who's exploring non monogamy as a heterosexual person,
Hmm.
right? Or someone
Yeah.
who's exploring their gender identity versus their sexual orientation. So, I think that the issue that folks are going to come up across, if you're not fitting into this perfect box that it appears like religion is telling you that you need to fit into, then you have to all of a sudden dig deep into yourself, figure out what that means, and then you have to actually like pull apart your own religious system and see what actually makes sense. Because one of the things that I like to do with my clients is have them understand where their views on their religion came from. And I mean, like, go deep into it. Like, if they're coming from Christianity, for example, and they're raised in the church, okay, tell me about your experience with the word of God. Have you read it? Where is it coming from? Where did you learn it from? Your family, your peers? Like, tell me about your practice around that? How does that impact your relationship with God? What is this like? So there's like a depth
Yeah.
of work that is being done here, because by no means do I think you can say to somebody, it's okay, it's fine, go explore this. Forget your religious upbringing. That's not the way that works.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we have to work together to find that intersectionality, because I believe that the spiritual component can be equally as important, and for some, even more important. So we have to really work with the individual.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And like you mentioned, really digging deep and exploring your faith, because just because I grew up in a Christian household in South Carolina does not mean that it is or was the same type of Christian household in New York somewhere,
Yes.
or in another
Yes.
country. So
Yes.
trying to dig deep to figure out what each piece means to you is important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And when you really dig into your faith, I have a quiz that I give some clients. It's
Mm,
pretty intensive. And it's like, let's talk about these things. And we talk, is the
interesting.
Bible the word of God? Is the Bible the word of man? Is it God's understanding? Like,
Mm,
we dig through everything. What
yeah.
does Jesus mean to you? Do you believe in angels? Do you believe in that? Like, we go deep,
Wow.
right? And then they can kind of go, well, this makes sense to me, but this piece doesn't really make sense to me. This is what I
Mhm.
was told, but I don't actually think that fits with this. So it's like they're really
Yeah.
doing like deep work.
Wow.
And the goal at the end of the day is stronger faith, not less faith.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? So it's like, if someone's like, I'm in my faith, that's not going to change. Well, how can we deepen that faith?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's not like you trying to erase or have someone start over with a complete belief system. Cause that's kind of where I was like, gosh, does someone just give up what they know or believe in? And again, trying to reconcile the two, that intersection.
Exactly.
See.
And I think that it is a big challenge to do this work. And this is what I'm trying to change.
Yeah.
There's not enough therapists that truly understand those intersections. And we have to understand that, like, we can't have an agenda as a therapist. Like, really can't have an agenda. Like, if you have someone that comes in and says, I feel like I could be polyamorous, we'll say, for example, I'm married, I'm very unhappy, but I'm going to stay in this marriage. I think I'm polyamorous, but I'm not going to act on it. What do I do?
Mm,
Well, it's not my job to tell them, well, you better go act on it. Right? Like, that's not my role, right? My role is to say, okay, let's dissect how you got here and what's going to ultimately work for you, right? That's my job. I need to carry the knowledge of this person's faith. I need to carry the knowledge of their exploration. I need to be able to help them work through those things rather than try to have them deny any parts of themselves.
We'll be right back after word from our sponsor.
Continuing education is both a requirement and a learning opportunity, but finding the right CE provider can be challenging. AATBS, a triad company, offers continuing education for psychologists, social workers, marriage and family therapists, counselors, and behavior analysts. CE courses are available both individually and as part of our new All Access Pass. All Access Pass provides a library of over 250 unique courses. That's more than 800 hours of CEs, with new courses being added every month. As a special offer, Behavioral Health Today listeners can save 15% on CE purchases. Visit us at aatbs.com/BHT and enter promo code BHT15 during checkout. That's aatbs.com/BHT. Check out our library and check off your CE requirements today.
So speaking of being aware of other religions, did you do some type of theological studies, or like what is your background in world religions? Because there are so many, and I've taken just one. I took a religion 101 class in undergrad. I don't know, 20 years ago or something. And so how do you become more well versed in it, and how does that impact your work with your clients?
Okay, so for me, I have a bachelor's in Southeast Asian religion. I have a master's in theology, which is a focus on Western religion, specifically
Okay.
Christianity. Now, do I think every therapist needs to do that? No, of course not. but I'd like to be a resource for those therapists.
Okay.
Like that's really what
Yeah.
I want to do is be a resource for folks so they understand those intersections more. But yeah, I spent, 12 years of my life studying religion.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, then, and I guess I don't need to have a conversation with you about how people experience religious guilt, especially when it relates to sexuality. So, can we talk a bit about how religious teachings of shame and fear around sex and how they impact one's sense of self, and their relationship with their body? Because I know personally, being raised in a Christian household, there were certain things that we did not talk about, that were not discussed. They were certain topics in general were supposed to be for your married life with the wife and the husband, and that is it. And even then, it was in a box that you did not go out of, and we did not talk about it at all. So I know how that impacted me growing up, or into my adult life. But can we talk a bit about just the impact of shame, fear around sex?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So that's actually right now under contract to write a book. It's called Religious Treatment Trauma Model. And
Okay.
I'm writing this book right now, and it is for therapists to work on the exact things that you're talking about, meeting the client where they are and working through
Mhm.
things around guilt and shame and autonomy and free will and fear of retribution. So you're right in my wheelhouse right now, 100%.
Nice.
So unfortunately, you'll have a lot of symptomology of someone with PTSD
Mm.
when you are in a religious environment that doesn't really allow for questions. And again,
Yeah.
I want to call it the like high control religious denominations, because there's obviously, like, it would be very unfair to just paint the broad brush,
Sure.
but there's plenty of high control religious groups, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you're told from go that there are certain things that you're not allowed to talk about
Mhm.
are actually natural, like I kind of look at it like God made us,
Yep.
right? And then this person, my pastor, my family, the tradition is telling me that everything God made me to be is wrong. How the heck do you reconcile that within yourself, especially as a child,
Yeah.
a teenager going through these feelings, right? And it's perfectly natural, yet
Mhm.
you're being shamed just because you exist.
Yeah.
And so you're going to have PTSD, you're going to have depression, anxiety. These things you're going to be triggered, and these things are going to chase you. And I see it over and over again. And I think it's important, like what you said too, is it's not necessarily around sexual orientation, gender identity, or the type of relationship. It's just what you're being taught about your own body and sexuality as a human being.
Right. Right. Yeah. And that, to a certain extent, a suppression of what your body naturally does.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And it doesn't give people the opportunity. And this is what I really want to emphasize here. It doesn't give people the opportunity to love and respect themselves and to know how to be respected by others.
Mm.
Because if you
That's real.
truly, like, it's like if you're taught we don't talk about this,
Mhm.
it's what you do. And then you find yourself in a situation that is not aligned with that, but you were never given a voice, then you may end up being in a situation that you truly don't want to be in. And then
Yeah.
you end up feeling horrible and rotten and guilty and traumatized.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it has nothing to do with you or what you've done, or what you weren't given the tools. So I
Right.
think, unfortunately, religion like that is providing the opposite of what I believe a loving God would want for us. I think a loving God want us to respect ourselves and respect each other and have conversations around natural inclinations of the body,
Yeah.
and how to respect yourself and how to respect others. I'm just really hooked on that because I feel like that's what gets missed so much when
It
when you
does.
touch someone.
Mhm.
It's bad. I can't talk about it. So what do you do if you're in a situation that you don't know what to do with?
Right. Right. And like you said, you end up in situations to where you may have done something that you didn't necessarily want to do, but you thought that that's what you should do. And then who then do you go to talk about it, because you're not supposed to talk about it? So what do you even do with all of the things? And then they become suppressed, and this is PTSD years later, and you're in your 30s and still trying to
Yeah.
figure it out.
Yeah. And then you end up carrying this shame about
Mhm.
you as a person, not necessarily even an action that took place.
Right.
It moves into that shame space,
Mhm.
thinking that there's something wrong with you. And that's devastating. And those are the things that I want to work against. So when I'm talking about sexual empowerment, when I'm talking about gender identity, sexual orientation, alternative relationship styles, I'm not saying it because I'm trying to be against the status quo. I'm talking about it because it exists in us. Maybe not everybody, right? But these things
Yeah.
do exist in us. And we have to talk about them because there's too many people that carry around shame and guilt, and they're hurting, and then they hurt others in the process.
Mhm. Mhm. So then what steps would you suggest to an individual who grew up in a type of environment where they were suppressed, learn to grow and deal with shame and fear around their sexual identity, or something that they wanted to experience that was not what they were taught was of the norm, goes against their spiritual beliefs? What steps does someone take to kind of integrate those different aspects of their lives? How do they go about doing that?
I would encourage first to, if they haven't read the works within their faith, and I keep going back to Christianity for this because that's my most well versed. That's what I work with the most.
Understood.
But I always say, let's go back to the Gospels. Let's talk about Jesus. Just read the Gospels. Just start there. What's Jesus telling you? Who is Jesus? What is the message of Jesus? And where are these other messages? Where are they coming from? Who are they coming from? Like, really understand that, because I think we have a lot of assumption that what Jesus may have said that Jesus did not say, or who said this in the Bible and why that's in the Bible, or where did the Bible even come from?
Mhm.
Like things like that. Like, so many people, and understandably so, like, how did the Bible even come into existence?
Right.
So it's like you got to ask some of those really hard questions. And as a faithful person, trust that God will talk to you.
Yeah.
One of the hardest things for me when I was younger, and I never struggled with religion in this way growing up, because as you heard earlier about my background, I didn't really start to look at these things till I was 18, 19.
Okay.
And I was digging really deep into it because I was around people telling me that this was wrong. My sexual orientation was wrong. I didn't believe that in my heart, but I was very confused about religion. And it was a really tumultuous time of trying to understand all of this. And I was reading and reading and reading. And obviously, like I just said, I did, 12 years of studying this. And it wasn't until I said, okay, God gave me a brain. God gave me a heart. God gave me a soul. If this isn't adding up, what I'm reading here is not adding up, what these people are telling me is not adding up, then maybe there's something to that, rather than there's something wrong with me.
Mm.
Like, if I can look at all of these things, and if I lean into trusting God, then that's the answer.
Yeah.
And trusting God is not trusting people that are speaking for God.
Right. It's the personal relationship that you've created.
Exactly. So that
Mhm.
is what brought me peace, and understanding that if someone claims that they have the answers, those are the people I want to be the furthest away from. Because how could you possibly have the answers about an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving being, but you know everything about this? No.
Hmm.
No way.
Yeah. And a little while ago, you mentioned that therapists need to explore a bit more about their own biases because, of course, as clinicians, we have bias that we bring into therapy. It's. I mean, I'm not going to say it's unavoidable, but if you don't address it, the trauma, we can increase it on our clients. So, how do you think that these biases affect the way that LGBTQ plus individuals and those dealing with religious trauma are treated? As a potential client, how would I find someone that is understanding of my religious issues or traumas that were created by religion?
Sure, sure. So one of the things that I would say to the therapist is no matter how well-meaning you may be, I truly have yet to personally meet a therapist that was out to be harmful in any way.
Agree.
Okay, not saying that they don't exist, but I haven't met that person. The experience of an LGBTQ person really is different than the experience of someone who's not part of that group.
Yeah.
So you're not really doing any favors for an LGBTQ person to say, I work with LGBTQ people, but don't really know the population, haven't really been with the population, understood how relationships can be different, how experience so it's and I kind of say that, with anything too, because I know like in school, I was taught we can work with anybody. The more I work with folks, the more I realize how true that is not.
Right.
What's your passion?
Mhm.
And then go learn, discover, and be in that wheelhouse. Like you're
Yeah.
not a good therapist because you can do 50 different modalities. A good therapist because you can do 2 with these 3 populations.
Right.
Really know what you're doing and have a good referral network.
Yeah.
I don't work with eating disorders. I could never. I don't work with substance abuse. I could never. So when someone comes to me with those things, I have a resource for that. I'm not going to try to
Right.
do what I can't do.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so I would just say, like, if you have a passion for certain communities, then learn about them and specialize in them. But don't just say you kind of do everything because it's just not true and it does cause harm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And just as you were speaking about different therapeutic approaches, are there certain approaches that you prefer to use while addressing religious trauma, sexual identity, non-monogamy while doing therapy? Is it more CBT, mindfulness type work? Like what type of therapeutic approaches do you use?
So I love the behavioral models. I'm always running in that field. So CBT,
Mhm.
DBT, ACT. I will throw in some other things too, what as needed, like might
Okay.
do a little psychodynamic work. I like to be eclectic in my approach, but I do lean heavily on the behavioral models because it's
Okay.
evidence based and it will work really well with these types of traumas that we're talking about.
Gotcha. Makes sense. So I love a good success story. Can you share a success story of an individual that you work with that were reconciling their sexual identity or gender along with their religious beliefs? And what did that process look like for them? What does success feel like?
I was working with an individual for over a year and they came from a very high controlled religious environment. One of the most extreme I have actually ever seen. They would go to church 4 or 5 times a week. Uh, you had to dress a certain way, talk a certain way, everything. It was just laid out very, very, and anybody outside of that particular church was wrong and going to go to hell.
Well,
So it was very, very, very high control. Right. So it took us over a year for this person to leave the church, and they had been in the church for about 20 years. And they were struggling with sexual orientation. And they still held a very strong conviction of a more conservative line of Christianity. So we had to do a lot of work around the acceptance of the sexual identity, which they did want to do that. They wanted to be in relationship, right? And they wanted to hold on to their very strong conservative Christian value system. So that's where my quiz came in. But after months, I mean, we really I needed to fully understand the scope of what was going on in the religious scene, upbringing of the individual. There's a lot of moving pieces here.
Mm-hmm.
But what we've been able to do, I'm just so proud of them. They have come to a place of being able to, they left that church, which was unbelievably difficult, rattles their whole world, and have a clear understanding of what their religious beliefs are. So they started exploring different churches. And this was kind of a fun thing because they were like, this is too liberal. This is too liberal. So all the affirming churches of LGBTQ folks was too liberal for them. Right. So it was that was very tricky. They had to really been working to find a church that can meet their religious belief system and their sexual orientation. And they finally did find a church that did that. Cause there's so many different denominations. I think you can find it in anything. Right. And now this person has so much more peace. And what I've noticed that in other areas of their life, they're able to stand up for themselves, and they're also able to understand their own values and feelings. When prior to that, they really didn't, because they leaned completely on the pastor.
Okay.
And what we always talk about is the depth of their relationship with God. That's a very important piece of this, right? So we've done that a lot. And, like I said, it's been a year and they are progressing beautifully. So I'm thrilled to see that.
That is awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
But mentioning that story actually gave me another question. So the exploration then of different religious perspectives, practices, church meetings or groupings or locations, is where the liberation came from? Or where does that liberation for the person or the individual, where does that come from? Is it being able to make a choice?
I think initially the liberation had to take place just out of the church. It wasn't so much about, there was a fear of other churches and other denominations. So the first move of liberation was to be able to separate the pastor from God. The pastor saying this is not God saying this.
Wow.
Right? So the liberation was being able to see God outside of the church. That was the first big revelation. And I think it was from there, and still months in the working of then going into other churches.
Gotcha.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
It's very difficult because we're wired to, if you're in this church or in this belief system and you are told this day after day after day, 5 days a week for 20 years, imagine the strength of those brain pathways.
Right. You have to create a whole, and it's not even necessarily creating a whole new, you just accepting maybe the pieces that are there and what does not necessarily isn't congruent with all the other pieces. That's very interesting.
Yeah, it's difficult. And so that's why, working with clients, I say to them, this will take time for you to find your peace and find your space, but we can get there. We can get there, and you can get there, but it's not going to happen overnight because this has been your life a lot of times, if you're raised in something and now you're coming to talk to me at 25, you have 25 years worth of this certain type of indoctrination that's taken place.
Absolutely.
Parse through. And sometimes we don't even know what it is we're trying to parse through, right? If you're born with something, you don't question it.
Right. Yeah, that, like I mentioned before, it sounds like a deep practice in first self-discovery and then self-acceptance as well.
Yes. Yes. There's a lot of autonomy involved in this.
Mm,
And the work is hard because you have to start asking questions. And oftentimes we're told not to ask questions.
mhm.
Right. And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
and that's truly a shame because again, God gave you a brain. Ask the questions. That should move you closer to your spiritual understanding, closer to God, not further away.
Right.
If the belief system is so weak that you can't ask a question, that's a problem.
Mm. That's heavy, but it is so real. I can't tell you how many times I was told as a child, like, you're not supposed to ask that question. You're
Yeah.
not supposed to question this. You just, this is what it said and you go with it.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't even say that my Christian experience was one that was very specific and heavily controlled, but it was very much, we don't ask questions.
Yeah.
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 You do what you're told to do.
Exactly. And and I think that if you're raised in that as an adult, it's hard to do, but I think it's an important thing to do. If you can't ask a question, then there's something wrong.
Mm.
Questions should help solidify, strengthen, create a stronger
Yeah.
foundation. The more you learn, right, the stronger your relationship to God would become, or whatever that may mean for you. And I obviously by no means would blame that on our parents or our grandparents. Like they were raised with the same
Right.
way to think, you
Yeah.
know? So it's jumping out of that box is not easy. But
Absolutely not.
it's well worth it because the depth of where you can go spiritually can be such a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. Okay. What message would you share with people who are feeling isolated? We've had a very tumultuous election season here recently. Going to experience a shift and change in power coming into Washington, and so a lot of people are feeling some level of isolation, rejection, especially with some of the things that are shared that are potentials for changes for non-traditional relationships and belief systems. So, how are we helping people find acceptance and community through all of that, this struggle that's happening, or looking ahead, thinking that there will be struggle? How do we help people as we transition?
I think you actually said it best a moment ago when you said community. People need people. And I do think that there are going to be some tough times ahead for folks that don't fit a certain mold.
Yeah.
And I would like to believe that even with steps that for me feel backwards, that we're still always moving forward. Uh, like it's like when you watch a movie from 15 years ago and you're like, whoa, that's cringy,
Yeah.
right? Like, can't believe they said that or they treat right. So it's like we forget, like we still move forward. And I feel like moments where people that are not fitting into the specific box are kind of being put on blast, I guess, for lack of a better word, right? Like
Mhm.
we're shaken up a bit. It's because something is changing, something is moving,
Mhm.
and I want to believe in my heart that it's going to continue to evolve and get better for everybody. But we
Yeah.
can only do that through the community and support and love and empathy, and even love and empathy, which can be very difficult. But for those that do think differently than you and trying to just understand, I'm not saying they have to be your best friend, but like what's going on there? Like, I think we need to understand each other.
Mhm.
Why are you feeling this way? What's going
Yeah.
on? You know, and we're all in this together. Like every last one of us, we're in this together.
Mhm.
Like I wish we can just get to a place where we see that we're responsible for
For
each
sure.
other.
Yeah.
Life is only going to be as good as my life at the end of the day.
Mm.
You know what I mean, like really, like
Yeah.
society is. You look at the person, the most marginalized person in our society, and that is the representation of who we are. Do we want to be this?
Mm.
And so what can we do? We can have conversations like this, connect with people that think and feel the same way, connect with those that don't think and feel the same way.
Absolutely.
Show up.
Yeah. Yeah. And being open to a different point of view.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, exactly. Where I live now, very different than I don't live in Long Beach right now. I live in a more conservative place. I understand the conservative mindset in a way that I didn't before. It's not because I want to go become a conservative, but I can go, okay, that's where I can relate to you.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can relate to you here, I can talk to you. And then you could see me as a person. I hate to have to say it that way, but like I'm a person too. Like we have similar concerns. You know what I mean? Like how can we do this together? How is oppressing the group of people actually beneficial for the thing that you're looking for in your life?
Right.
Looking for a better job, how is oppressing people that are transgender going to be effective for you having a better job or making more money? Like how does that correlate?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So it's like, let's talk about what are the actual solutions to the problems that many of us are facing.
Right. It's like you said, we are literally all in this together.
We sure are. Yeah.
We are all here together.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up today, where can our listeners learn more about your work, follow up with you? Let us know how they can connect with you, especially therapists who are looking to add to their wheelhouse and being more accessible to those who, are suffering with these concerns.
So if you jump on my personal website, which is annrusso.org, I have information on there. You can join the mailing list for when the book's going to come out on the related trauma model. And I'll have trainings being posted soon that are CE. I'm certified through the ASWB. So they are.
Nice.
Yeah. That took a lot of work, let me tell you.
Oh, I believe it. I'm so sure because I did it.
But they are certified. I'm a certified provider.
Nice.
And if you're someone who's looking to work with a therapist, we have the sliding scale, amrtherapy.com. And that there's 15 of us and a really good bunch of people who are really, really in it to be there for folks that have felt marginalized or have had barriers to therapy.
Nice. Nice. Thank you so much. And I really have appreciated speaking with you today. Before we got on, I mentioned that this is a topic that I don't know much about. And so I really appreciate you opening my eyes to some things that I hadn't seen in this way. So thank you so much for speaking with us.
Oh, thank you. It was really joyful to speak with you too. I really appreciate it. Anytime.
Absolutely.
Anytime.
Absolutely. And thank you to our listeners for taking the time to join us. Before we go, we'd love your help. Please leave a review and share the podcast with a friend. By spreading the word, you help us grow and reach more people, allowing others to discover the valuable insights shared in each episode. Thank you for being such an important part of the Behavioral Health Today community. As always, the resources for this episode and an archive of all of our other episodes can be found on our webpage at triadhq.com/BHT. And we look forward to having you back with us next time on Behavioral Health Today.
We appreciate all the support from our community, and if you like our show, one of the best ways you can support it is by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review. Behavioral Health Today is a podcast part of the Triad Behavioral Health Network, all rights reserved.